we're joined by well-known author John Burdett. John, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So perhaps if we can start with a little bit about yourself, so your background, because I understand that you, before becoming a writer, you were in fact a lawyer, is that correct?
Oh yeah, I practiced law for 14 years, 2 years in London and 12 years in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong I started working for the Attorney General's Chambers, which was basically the British government's law chambers. And then I went into private practice. I became a partner in the biggest local law firm there, although at that time we were being crowded out by massive international law firms, people like Baker and McKenzie and so on, Clifford Chance. And I always wanted to write novels. I didn't really want to be a lawyer in the first place. So when I got enough money, I mean Hong Kong as it probably still is, I'm sure it still is a great place to make money. When I had enough money I simply retired and decided to do, or try to do, what I'd always wanted to do. I mean since I was about 12 years old.
That's great then, you're living your dream.
Yeah.
So what about the process of actually writing a book itself? How did you go about writing your first book? Did you just sit and write, or...?
Well, I mean, your first book, really, the whole time I was a lawyer, I was sort of thinking and experimenting somewhat. I didn't have the time to concentrate on actually writing a novel, but bits of it would sort of emerge. So when I finally retired, I just sort of forced myself to go through quite a few drafts. But then I got published for the first time in New York, at Moz in New York. And they said, well, you've been in Hong Kong, you know Hong Kong, and it's about to revert to China, there's going to be huge publicity, why don't you write a novel about the return to China? So I did. I mean, it's the only purely commercial book I've ever written, and it was successful because the film company bought the rights outright, and I went on from there.
Interesting. So if I understand correctly from your website, you split your time now between Bangkok and the south of France, is that right?
Southwest France. I have a house about 100 miles north of Toulouse. I stay there with my Thai wife about 3 months of the year. We do some traveling, Spain, Italy, and she wanted to go to Switzerland, being Thai, brought up in Bangkok. She's never seen snow and mountains and that sort of thing, so we did the whole Swiss mountain thing last year.
Sounds lovely. Obviously you're with us in Bangkok at the moment. Given the current political situation, I might as well ask, how, if at all, you found your daily life affected by the Bangkok shutdown?
Very little, except that I use the Asok interchange a lot for various reasons, and but usually as a pedestrian, so it didn't really affect me that much at all as a pedestrian or using BTS. But it was, a little strange to find your city, under attack. Really, it was like an outside army was sort of taking over bits of it. I think it was the whistling that got on my nerves the most.
Quite loud.
It's just so irritating.
So turning back to your writing, you've touched upon a little bit about your genre and style, but for those not familiar with your work, tell us a little bit more about sort of generally your writing style, what types of books you write.
Well, after my Hong Kong book, which the title was The Last 6 Million Seconds, there was a big gap. I just didn't know what to write. But I knew I wanted to come to Thailand. I'd been here, obviously, in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, which was incredibly stressful. There was one statistic said it was second only to Lebanon in terms of stress, and Lebanon was in the Civil War at the time. Yeah, so we used to come here. I used to come here about 4 times a year with friends. So I knew that I loved Thailand and the people and so on. I also fascinated by Buddhism, but not knowing that much about it. So I came and decided I wanted to write a book about Bangkok. I thought it would be a police thriller because the one before about Hong Kong was also a police thriller, and I figured I knew how to do it. And I thought what I'd do was hang out at the red light district, simply because I was told by a number of people that there was a tourist police who speak English. So I was hanging out waiting for the English-speaking cops who never arrived. The police would come at the curfew at 2 o'clock in the morning to make sure everyone was shut down, but none of them spoke a word of English, and none of them were particularly interested in entertaining an English novelist at that time in the morning. But what happened was I was spending a lot of time talking to the girls at the bars, of whom I knew nothing. I assumed that they were just local Bangkok girls who worked in these bars. That when I realised that it was a whole different community, I mean, some call it a subculture, some call it an alternative culture, basically people from the northeast, from Isan, who speak a different language. It's basically a dialect of Lao, who come to the big city for money because the land, unlike the rest of Thailand, the land in Isan is not that fertile, not that easy to make a living, and you have one slight variation in the international price of rice, and you have big problems, as we know at the moment, and the government has a problem with that. And little by little, I realised that these girls were the story, that it was a much more interesting and a much more human story than if I'd simply written a police procedural. At the same time, I figured I really needed to know more about Buddhism, more about Isan, more about Thailand, and also the very curious market, I have to call it that for want of a better word, of young or youngish Thai women from Isan with middle-aged Western men. I mean, a lot of people despise it and loathe it. I think because of the visual impact, I have to admit, not very attractive to see a fat middle-aged white man with a beautiful young 20-something slim Thai girl. But when you go underneath it, the nature of the relationships are curious. The girl usually doesn't think of herself as a prostitute. She thinks that she comes from an impoverished background. As a Buddhist, she believes she has an absolute duty to take care of her parents. She knows she can't make any money at all in Isan, in the poor parts of Isan. There's no economy. It's a barter economy. Nobody has any cash. If she comes to the big city, she thinks she can. I mean, the gold ring is to find a white man who'll marry her. Failing that, at least a kind of a sugar daddy, someone who'll support her. And there's an awful lot of that goes on very friendly terms. I mean, it's a very amicable, non-aggressive sort of relationship. I'd even suggest it wasn't really exploitative. I suppose a lot of people disagree with that. I don't really see it. I think it's mutual interest myself. So actually radically different from supposedly the profession of prostitution in other environments in other countries, which I don't really know very much about. It just looks frankly nasty when you see pictures of it on the media. So that in itself, a whole different culture, a whole different economy, and an absolutely radical different attitude towards sexual relationships.
So I think, obviously, Bangkok, which you touch upon, it is known for its sex districts, or numerous sex districts here. But I think what a lot of people don't realise is that under the Thai Penal Code, prostitution is in fact, it's suggested that it's illegal. How do you think the trade would change at all if it was made legal?
I can't say I see that as a positive move, because I think when people say legalise it, people automatically assume, oh well, then everybody's free to do it. But what governments normally mean when they talk about legalising it is controlling it. There was a proposal, and I think it was under Thaksin's first government, to do that, and so you would have zoned areas, zoned red light districts. I think if you do that, what happens is big money comes in because it's no longer illegal, so a corporation could do it without fear of being blackmailed by police, basically. And I think that the girls would have to pay tax, of course, and the whole thing would be regulated and regularized, and probably dehumanized. I mean, at the moment, it's very, very human. Obviously, the girls pay no tax at all, and the bars are usually pretty small businesses. Family businesses, actually. Very often it's the money comes from a Western man, about 50% Australian actually, with some Brits and some French too, and some Americans, with Thai women, usually their wives or people within their Thai family who run the thing, and with a mama-san, usually a former working girl herself, who is there to run the bar. So it's pretty small. Every bar is unique, and if you get to know the girls in the bars, you realise that in every bar, most of the girls seem to come from the same place, not just the same area, but sometimes the same village, and they're often related, like cousins and brothers and sisters and so on, running the thing. All that would go, of course, if it was legalized.
Interesting. So that was where you did a lot of your research with regards to the bar girls. Probably one of your most well-known series is the Bangkok 8 series. You touched upon learning about Buddhism before, and the main character of that series is a Buddhist cop,
Yes.
Sanchai. How did you go about doing your research on him? Is he based on anyone or a number of people, or...?
It's very hard to say. I think a number of people. But also he's a vehicle. I mean, obviously he's a very human vehicle, but he's a vehicle for observing the city through his eyes. He's a vehicle for expressing the difference between honest cops and dishonest cops. And he's a vehicle for his own Buddhism, which I found amongst people his age, I have to say, mid-30s or so on, who like Buddhism and have been brought up with Buddhism, but don't really accept the rituals of Theravada Buddhism. They tend to think that Buddhism is more of it's a mental exercise, actually, a mental and religious discipline, with a fascinating theology. It's a theology which many people in the West now have realized fits so much better with modern science, astrophysics in particular, than many of the other religions, particularly Christianity, where I suppose if you're a devout Christian today, you still believe that a corpse resurrected and walked around and snakes talk and things like that. So it is, in a sense, Buddhism is the opposite to something like Christianity, where it's simply more modern, even though it's older. It's more modern than those other religions which tended to be afflicted by the issues in Palestine and the Middle East at the time that they were created.
Interesting. So your actual stories themselves, where do you get your inspiration? Is it just from what's going on around you, or...?
Yeah, when I look back at the novels, what I see is that there's a whole stream of information. This is an information age, you can get information anywhere. I love YouTube recently because there's just so much instant information on it. Not just 10-minute clips, but whole documentaries and things like that. And learning Thai, I've been struggling
I sympathise.
for some time. All I can say is it's by no means perfect, but it does get better. If you keep at it, it gets better and you understand more. So there's a lot of information comes in, perhaps not because my Thai is so great, but because I'm spending a lot of time talking to Thai teachers. And you can't really learn a language without learning the culture, and the teachers can't teach it without teaching the culture. So I've learned an awful lot through my Thai teachers. That's information that comes in. My wife is from Isan, north of Isan. I've been up there quite a few times, and so I've sort of gained information. I've seen it firsthand, the origin of many of the people who work in Bangkok. I mean, you have to explain to visitors that almost everyone they come into contact with, like the street sellers, very often almost all the people working in the bars and in the restaurants and so on, are not Bangkokians at all. They're from Isan. So this whole subculture, alternative culture, also is like an information feed which is continuous.
So tell us a little bit more about your most recent book then. What's that about?
Vulture Peak. Well, I was horrified when I first heard about organ selling, the sale of human organs. Doubly horrified when I realized that it was very often a brutal exploitation of the poor by the rich. So often, actually not so much in Thailand. I had to sort of emphasize in the book that it wasn't really a Thai problem. It's just that I was writing a novel about Thailand. But somewhere like the Philippines or Brazil or somewhere like that, where you find young people, young men, almost always men, with these massive abdominal scars because they've sold a kidney for really very little money, like $1,000 or something like that. And of course the middlemen have made a fortune. The actual purchaser has paid maybe $50,000 or something like that, so everything else is markup and surgeons and so on. And I just thought, well, that's just appalling. And the more I went into it, the more horrified I was. So I built the whole novel really about that trade. And I put it together with my experience in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is absolutely 100% obsessively money-minded, profits-minded, and so on. So although I have no idea if there's sale of organs goes on in Hong Kong, it was just a perfect locale for an organisation that traded in human organs.
Do your readers tend to be expats here or worldwide? Have you noticed any particular trends? Or
of course, a lot of them are expats. An awful lot of my readership worldwide tends to be men my age or a little bit older who were in Vietnam or in the China War or attached to it in one way or another, and grew to love Thailand, or grew to love Southeast Asia basically, because a lot of them also in the Philippines. But then you get the young urban men, youngish urban men who like me think that there's an awful lot of internal mental pressure in being alive in a modern city today. And what direction does that pressure take in an individual? What do they reach out to? What do they seek? A certain kind of Buddhism, a certain kind of esoteric Christianity, a certain kind of socialism, whatever. These are all thoughts that go through the central character's head. And all this sort of comes together, hopefully. I mean, it takes 3 or 4 drafts. It's a bit of a mess on the first 2 drafts.
But eventually it all falls into place.
Well, we just keep going, it has to.
Until it does. We've noticed that there is quite a lot of books based in Bangkok and Thailand.
Mm.
What is it, I mean, you've touched upon a few things, but what is it in particular that you think makes this such an interesting setting?
Well, my Bangkok 8 was published about 12 years ago, I think. And as far as I know, that was the first internationally published novel actually absolutely about Bangkok, with very few Farang characters in it. And it was published, I was extremely fortunate, it was published by Knopf in New York, which is the leading English language publisher. It's now part of the huge conglomeration which includes Penguin and Random House. And I think that impressed a lot of people, particularly Americans, who thought, wow, so we can write about Bangkok and hope to get a reasonably broad readership. And since then, a lot of things have, a lot of new writers have come on board and writing thrillers based in Bangkok, basically.
Certainly, I think a lot of material that can be used about Bangkok.
Well, it's a fascinating city, and it has, for Western, I think, whether you're American or European, it has this wonderful kind of resonance in the sense that we know in the back of our minds that once upon a time London was like that. Dickens's London was much more like Bangkok than like modern London. And New York, the whole waves of immigration into New York, and then there's Los Angeles, you know, in the basis of so many Noir books. And all these things seem to have resonance in Bangkok, and Bangkok is as though it's before the clampdown, it's before the law enforcement clampdown that makes everything a little bit flatter.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.